Thanks everybody for joining us. Great to see so many people, so many new faces, lots of people that I recognise as well. This is our last moth morning of the year, so I'm glad you could join us. Hopefully we'll have a few more events early next year, but this will be it for now. This morning, myself, Caroline and Ben will be giving you a little bit of an introduction to leaf mining. Mainly, Ben will be doing most of the introducing, and myself and Caroline will just be showing you a few of our finds recently. So Ben is, well, I'd say he's an expert in the early stages of micro-moths, and his knowledge is, in my opinion, second to none, and I'm very pleased that he's quite happy to share that knowledge with us today. So if I could hand you over to Ben as our first presenter, we'll get going.
Okay, thanks so much. Thanks, Justine.
You're welcome.
Thanks to you, and to Jane and Caroline for organising the event. So yeah, I'm going to talk about leaf mines today. An addictive subject, quite easy to find. Got a selection here from the garden this morning. Something on holly, which isn't actually a moth, but there you go. A few different species on snowberry, something on herb Bennett, and something on ash, and we'll go through those a bit later in a bit more detail. I've done a PowerPoint presentation to go with this, so probably best if I put that up on the screen there, and I'll carry on talking while we show that.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions throughout this, just use the chat function, and we'll be more than happy to stop and answer those as best as we can.
Taking a bit of time to there we go. Can everyone see that? I've put up, no, I don't. Yeah, I've put up the presentation. Someone let me know if we can see that.
Yeah, that's good.
We can see it then.
That's great. Thanks very much. Okay, so this session's been talked about for a few months. We initially planned to put on a classroom session, followed by a field session, but obviously with the state of play, that wasn't possible. So we can do this instead. And one advantage is we've got far more people here than we would have managed with, you know, a classroom session or a field session. So the purpose of today then is to introduce the highly addictive subject of leaf mining to a wider audience. Butterflies, gay flying moths, any moths, in pretty short supply now at this time of year. But really, by going out looking for leaf mines, you can come across many new species, and it's possible to record 20, 30, 40 or more species in a day by looking for leaf mines. Pretty much wherever you are, at any point of the day, you'll never be far from a leaf mine. You know, you might be stood at a bus stop, you might be in a supermarket car park, and there'll always be a plant nearby where you can have a look and always record something new. So we'll just show you how to get started, really. Autumn's certainly the most productive time to search for leaf mines, and I'm going to concentrate on species that we can find at this time of year, but really they're present all year round. Certain species, yeah, there's certain species that will mine through the winter, and you can see the larvae in the mines even in December, January, February. If any of you have got my book, Micro-moth Field Tips, you'll see that there's at least 1 or 2 leaf miners featured for every single month of the year. Okay, so, well, what is a leaf mine? Well, there's an example. You can see that there's a dark trail on the leaf. In this example, it's a rose leaf. The dark trail is within a paler patch, and right at the end of the trail is something that looks like a very tiny caterpillar. And that's the caterpillar of a micro-moth called Stigmella anomalella. And it is a micro-moth. It's only about 2 or 3 millimeters long. It's really, really common, but you'll probably never see the adult unless you were to try and rear it through. But in terms of turning in your trap, particularly in a state where it would be identifiable, that's not going to happen. So really, the only way to see this moth is to rear it through from the larval stage. Okay. So a leaf mine is the visible evidence on the leaf of the larval feeding within the leaf. So it's feeding between the upper and the lower epidermis. It's not spinning where it might be have just spun the leaf and put a lot of silk on and be feeding under the silk. It's actually inside the leaf. And what we can see are clear patches that develop as parts of the leaf matter are eaten out, and some dark patterns which is caused by frass, which is caterpillar feces, caterpillar droppings. It's not only moths that do this. The holly leaf I showed earlier had a fly mine in it, so flies, Diptera, sawflies from Hymenoptera, and beetles, Coleoptera. Certain larvae of those orders will also mine leaves, which can be a bit confusing, but there's over 400 species of moth that do so, and probably well over 200 species that can be found in Lancashire that will do so. So there's plenty to look for. I've seen loads, but you know what, there's loads I haven't seen as well, so that there's plenty out there. Some of the larvae stay in the leaf mine for the whole of their development, others only for parts of it. There's many different types of mines on many different types of plants. And the great thing about it is the structure of a mine, as long as you know what plants you're on, will often allow an accurate identification. As I said, most mines contain frass, but the correct plant identification is essential, as most leaf miner species are plant specific. And I've found that leaf mine is a great way to learn about plants and to really get your your tree and your plant identification sorted. And sometimes it's worked where I've recognised the mine. So I think, okay, well, then it must be this particular tree. So it can sometimes work the other way around. Certainly when you're getting started, it's best to start with a plant that you're familiar with. You know, if you can't identify what leaf you found it on, then you're probably not going to be able to identify the miner. So start with things you're familiar with. You know, hawthorn's pretty easy, isn't it? Beech. I'd say avoid oak, although the leaf's really easy to recognise. There's so many different miners on oak that it can be a bit of excuse the pun, bit of a minefield. Okay, so that's what a leaf mine is. There's different types of leaf mines and they can be categorised thus, and here's a couple of examples of gallery mines formed by the micro-moth Stigmella aurella. This will feed on plants of the rubus genus such as bramble and raspberry, and also sometimes on geum, I think that's how it's pronounced, but woodhavens or herb bennet, which is a really, really common weed, especially down here in VC59. It seems to be spreading like wildfire. And I seem to find more mines on this nowadays than bramble. But yeah, this is one species that can mine throughout the year, and you can find larvae in any month of the year. So if you have a careful look, each of these leaves contains 3 or 4 mines. Actually, the one on the left has got about 6 or 7 mines in there, because I can see 7 caterpillars on there, which are the little sort of greyish, yellowish, obviously caterpillars at the end of the mines. So it's formed a real swirl, a real maze of mining. And within the sort of white track, you can see in the centre of it is a black line, and that black line is formed by frass. So mines like this that form a single continuous line are referred to as gallery mines. And this is typical of moths of the Stigmella genus, of which there are about 60 or so. Okay. And then another type of mine is a blotch mine, where rather than have an obvious discrete track, it is just a blotch. Very often these will start as a tiny gallery, but that quickly gets submerged by the blotch. As the larva gets bigger, it just forms this blotch. Sometimes the frass remains within the mines and is often piled up at one end of the blotch, or in some cases there's a mechanism to eject the frass from the mine. And in this case, this species here, Ectodemia subimmaculella, which feeds on oak, there's a little slit underneath the mine, and that's an important diagnostic feature to identify this mine. And that slit is used to eject frass from the mine. Okay. Another very common type of mine is blister mines or tentiform mines, where like a tent is formed. These are generally on the underside of the leaf. There's a few species that will do it on the upper side. And you'll often see creases forming as the larva develops. Now, this one pictured is a birch leaf, or part of a birch leaf anyway, and it contains a couple of mines of a species, a very common species, Phalaenophyta ulmifoliella. The mine on the left is a very early one. I can't quite tell on the photo, but I could just about see a larva here because it's just a very thin mine at this stage. It's just feeding beneath the lower epidermis. But then as the mine develops, as the one on the right has a bit more, it starts to pull the leaf in and these creases form in the bottom of the leaf. And these blister or tentiform mines are typical of the Phalaenophyta genus. Yeah, and did I say there's about 60 of those? Very common on most trees. There will be a Phalaenophyta that, or 2 or 3, or in some cases 4 or 5 that feed on that particular tree. Something else you might find, now this is a species really that will only, like I said, some species will only mine for part of their development. And really this is an example, Caloptilia rufipanella, feeds on sycamore. All the Caloptilia genus will all mine for the first couple of instars, and then they'll leave their mine and start forming cones like this. So it rolls the leaf into a fairly tidy cone and carries on feeding within. So this is this. If you find this on sycamore, this is the only species that causes this. So that's quite a nice one to look for. There's one on alder, Caloptilia elongella. There's a couple on birch, although the mines are a little bit different. What else? There's one on azalea, and there's one on sallow and one on privet and ash. And they all have similar, as ash is a couple on ash, but anyway, they all have similar feeding patterns. Closely related to the Caloptilia micro-moths are the Poroonyx micro-moths. Now these are a good one to look for because quite often Poroonyx moths will turn up in the moth trap. And anyone who's ever tried to identify an adult Poroonyx will quickly be disappointed to realise that, well, they all look the same. There's not really any way of identifying them other than having them dissected, which, you know, is not quite as satisfying, I guess. But if you find the early stages, then they can be identified. Maybe this one actually isn't the best example. So this forms an obvious leaf fold, and you can see I've shown a couple of mines there. The one at front shows the underside of the leaf, and you can just see a line of silk. So it's really quite a dense silk layer of silk that's keeping the mine closed. There's actually a couple of species on birch, but Poroonyx loganella is very, very specific, and it's a sort of moorland type of habitats. At this time of year, it would be more likely to be Betulella, but probably better examples would be Poroonyx anglicella on hawthorn, and there's Poroonyx devoniella on hazel, because they're not really going to be anything else. Okay, right, so that's just an overview of different types of mines, and it's very helpful when you find a mine to be able to describe what type it is. I just wanted to go through the various micro-moth families and show how many different types of mines there are, what a great variety there is, and how they'll hopefully, you know, generate some enthusiasm and interest in this topic. So one of the families that leave mines is the Eriocranias. This is an exception actually compared to the rest in that you won't find this at this time of year. All the area crania larvae mine earlier in the year in spring, or in one case in early summer. So this anyway, this is an example that is easy to identify. You won't find it until April and May. And it forms this blotch mine on birch. There's 6 area crania species that mine birch. They're all identifiable in the mine. They're not really identifiable, certainly not easily as an adult. So it's much better to record these as a mine. And this one's got a dark grey larva, the others from the genus are white. And you can see on this mine, as I said before, that a lot of the blotch mines will start as a gallery mine. But you can just see to the right of the mine, there is a little gallery there where it has formed a little track with a discrete line of frass. But after that, the blotch just gets wider and wider, and the frass is just laid down at one end of the mine in sort of like spaghetti, in long strands of frass. Yeah, one of the commonest, probably the commonest leaf miner family is the Nepticulids, and this contains 60 stigmella species, 30 ectodemias, and a few others. The stigmellas, as I say, will generally form these gallery mines, and this example is on beech Titurella, and it forms these lovely S-shaped bends. There's 2 species that form on beech, but with a little bit of care, they're not difficult to differentiate. And I think beech is quite a nice tree species to get started on. And if you find your beech tree, I'm pretty sure you'll find these mines at this time of year. Helioselidae is quite a small family. There's only 3 members of this family that you'll find in this region. And they all have a larva that feeds down at the base of the leaf and in the midrib, and the mine is often very difficult to see until the larva is almost full fed, at which point it enters the leaf and then forms a cutout of part of the mine, which you can just about see this larva is starting to do. It forms a case out of that, and the case drops to the ground, leaving the hole in the leaf, and the hole is enough to identify this species. Again, you wouldn't identify it if the moth turned up at your trap, which in itself is pretty unlikely that it would turn up, because I don't think it's one that would fly far from the food plant. So it's very easy to identify though as from the feeding signs. So this one, Heliosella resplendella, is on alder. There's also Heliosella ammoniella on birch, and Heliosella sericella on oak, which all have a similar cutout from where the larval case drops to the ground. You're unlikely to find this one, really. I think I was very lucky to find it recently on a field trip with Steve Palmer up at Cragwood in VC60, and we found loads of these on the bilberry leaves beneath the oak trees. I found one leaf with 14 larvae of Incaveria olmaniana. Yeah, 14 larvae in a single leaf. And when the larva just stays within the leaf for the first, I'm not sure whether it's the first or perhaps the first 2 instars, after which point it drops to the ground within a case similar to the Heliosella species before. So at that point, you'll start to see lots of little round holes within the leaf. Thought that was wrong. It's Incaveria olmaniella rather than olmaniana, if anyone's taking notes. Yeah, I thought that didn't look right. So that species there was found on bilberry. Apparently it can be found on blackthorn and other prunus species as well, and maybe other plants as well. I don't know that it's completely known. So I've got quite a few of these that are still feeding away that I've kept at home. They're within a case with a case just formed out of 2 flat pieces of leaf sewn together, and it just sticks its head out every now and then and nibbles a bit of underside of prunus or bilberry, which is what it's being fed on there. Yeah, this isn't a bad species to look for. It is on oak, but not easy to confuse with anything else that you'll find on oak. Tischeria ecobladella, and that's an example of the Tischeridae family. This can be found on oak or sweet chestnut, To me, I always think this mine looks like a fried egg. The outer part of it is particularly white. It looks a bit green there on the photo, but when you're out in the field, it looks very white, with the central part looking more yellowish, orangey. And you'll see if you hold it up to the light that the larva is in a round cocoon, particularly later on as it becomes full fed. When it is completely full fed, the larva just sits there in a C shape, like in the photo, and just sits there over winter. The leaf drops to the ground, the larva stays in larval form and doesn't pupate until spring. So this species can be found as long as there's leaves on oak trees, and actually some leaves stay on oak trees throughout the winter, particularly on oak saplings. So you can record this species really well into the new year quite easily. Another family, Tinnidae. There's only a few of this family that mine, but quite a common one, feeding on various leaves, on various ferns, sorry. The Psychoides felicivora. This is a species that's become really common in the last 10 years or so. And yeah, feeds on various ferns, hart's tongue fern, polypodum, which is what's on the right, where you can see the larva in the mine. And this will only mine for the first couple of instars. It then leaves and this massive sporangia and frass that you can see on the left-hand photo. And this larva has quite a pale head. There's a very closely related species, Psychoides vohella, which is much less common, which has a black head. So the two should be easily separable. But I would always, you're much likelier to find felicivora, certainly in most parts of the county. A small family, Roeslastamidae. Well, it is very small, Roeslastamidae, because I think this is actually the only species, certainly in the county and probably in the country. And this just mines the tips of lime or birch, more commonly on lime. A nice family to look for is the Buccalatricidae. Buccalatrix ulmella is a good one to look for. It's on oak. It forms these very short gallery mines ending in a right angled turn. If you look at the start of the mine, you can usually see a fairly dull black egg. I should have mentioned actually earlier with the nepticulids, a lot of the gallery mines, you can see the egg at the start of the mine, and that can be an important diagnostic feature too. Briefly mentioned in relation to Caloptilia, Rufiopinella on sycamore earlier in the talk, about how it forms cones on sycamore, and there's other species that do the same on ash and privet. Well, this species used to be called Caloptilia syringella, but it's recently had its name changed for some reason, and it's now Gracilaria syringella. But it also forms cones, a bit more untidy than the ones on sycamore, and these cones can be seen on privet, ash and lilac. And I found examples on all three plants in our garden this morning. So this is one you can look for at the moment. The same family, Gracilaridae, but is the genus Philonericta. Most of them form underside mines, but there's only a few that form upper side mines, and those ones therefore are very easy to identify as long as you've got the tree right. And this is one that feeds on hazel, really common at the moment. Philonericta, corylli, and this forms these upper surface mines, which initially look like white, flat patches, but as they develop, they can crease and leaf up, and you can see examples of various stages of the mines on this photo. There'll be 4 different larvae on that leaf, one in each of those mines. Eponymutidae, some of these species mine for the whole of their existence, some for a little bit of it, and some aren't miners at all. But this species, Sedestis subfasciella, mines for the whole of its larval stage. And it mines pine needles. So it's quite specific. To find it, you've obviously got to go to an area where pine exists, but if you do that, you're pretty much sure to find the species. And again, it's one you can find throughout much of the year. I've certainly found them at the end of January and in early February. So it's a nice one to look for when there's not much else going on. And I think I like that. I think this is quite a nice mine. It mines from the tip of the needle down to the base and somehow manages to get enough nutrition out of that to pupate and emerge as a moth. So it's a green larva, but there's a few other species that mine pine, so you do need to be a little bit careful with that. Glyphipterigidae, on bittersweet Solanum, Acrolepia autumnitella. This forms white splotches, and you can see a white larva within the central mine on the photo. There is another species, Scrobipalpa costella, that also feeds on the same food plant, but they're generally much less tidy, and it's quite a dark larva, so quite easy to separate. That's quite a nice one to look for. If you find a patch of bittersweet, you'll almost certainly find this. It's one that's really spread in the county during the last 10, 20 years. It used to be very uncommon, just found perhaps in the south of the county, but it's really, really spread. A couple of species we know of that feed on cypresses. So if you've got a Leylandy cypress in yours or a neighbour's garden, one that you detest maybe, you can start to see some beauty in it by looking for the leaf mines. And you can see pale brown patches, almost whitish. And if you look closely, you can just about see a caterpillar within there and some patches of frass. The photo on the right, you can see some little grains of frass near the top of the photo as it tries to eject the frass as it feeds. This larvae of this species will leave the mines, re-enter new leaves. Yeah, and this is Agarostia trifasciata, which is a moth that you probably, most of you, if you run a moth trap, will have seen. It's a very small moth, kind of golden brown colour with three stripes running across the wing. And there's a similar species, Agarostia cupricella, that forms similar mines in spring. Lionichidae, possibly the commonest miner, I think, this species. You can't miss it anyway. And if you're anywhere near apple, birch, hawthorn, rowan, blackthorn, cherry, don't miss anything, whitebeam, Cotoneaster, you'll find this mine, and it's a long, serpentine, winding gallery mine with a deeply segmented larva at the end of it. When the larva's full fed, it then forms a cocoon, usually underneath the leaf, which you can see in the top right-hand photo. And then the moth that emerges is the one down, obviously down in the bottom right. This moth will sometimes turn up at the trap, but it's like many, it's a bit battered by the time it gets there, not quite as easy to identify. But I'm pretty sure you'll all be able to identify this species within 100 yards of wherever you live. It's a nice one to get started on. Plus, these common ones are good to recognise. Because as it feeds on so many different species, it's good to be able to eliminate it if you're trying to identify something else. Bedelidae, there's only one member of this family, Bedelia somnolentella, which is another species that starts with a gallery mine, then a blotch mine, and it feeds on bindweed. And that might still be found this time of year, possibly a little bit late now. Bit unlikely to find this really, but this was one I found here in Chorlton, Manchester, about this time of year, and it forms webs in spring, but around this time of year the tiny larvae can be found in leaf mines, and this leaf held about 20 or 30 larvae. It's quite amazing, never quite seen anything like it before or since. That was a really nice find. Galecidae, Steve Palmer's favourite family. There's lots of miners within this family, and quite an easy one to find is Scrobipalpa acuminatella. This feeds on creeping thistle, other thistles as well, and it forms this big blotch mine in the centre of the leaf. You may still find some tenanted mines. The one photographed was found on the 2nd of November here in Manchester, so it's still possible. And when the larva becomes full fed, it has these distinctive sort of pale pink and red stripes. Yes, that's quite a nice species to look for. Coleophoridae, this is an interesting family that makes cases out of parts of leaf, and the larva pokes its head out of the case, and most of them will mine leaves by doing so. So the case attaches itself to the bottom of a leaf. The larva makes a little hole and then winds itself out of the case, and most of it enters the leaf, eats away at the leaf, and then retracts itself back into the larva and ejects the frass from the bottom end of the case. And the one shown is Coleophora griffipinella, which feeds on rose. And at this time of year, the cases look like this with really nice sort of jagged edges. And as you can probably guess, it's constructed from the edge of a rose leaf, hence the shape of the mine. There's loads in this family, about, I think there's over 100. Again, pretty much every tree will have a Coleophora species, or 2 or 3 or more that feed on it. Not always that easy to find. The Elachistidae family, there's about 50 species, about half of which occur in the county, and almost all of them feed on grasses. There's 1 or 2 exceptions, but most of them feed on grasses. And this is one that can be found at the moment if you go to somewhere where purple moor grass grows, so some sort of mossy, boggy areas up on the hills. Spend a bit of time looking. You may well come across Elachistidae subalbidella. I found it at 2 or 3 sites recently. And you just look for the white patches on the blade of the grass. And if you're lucky, you may still see, well, you should still see the larva, and actually, because it overwinters within the mine. That's quite a nice one to look for. And okay, another family, Momphidae, about 15 in this family. Few of them are miners. And one of them that you can find up in VC60 is Memphisella on rock rose, and that can be found mining. So I've found it in early November in leaf mines. I think that might actually be the photo from early November. We found it at 8 Barrows a few years ago. But anywhere where rock rose grows, that's a species to look for. Epimenidae, quite a small family, but there is 1 species, Epimenia carophylla, that feeds on hogweed. This mines for the early part of its development, and then eats away at the underside of a leaf, leaving the sort of distinctive brown patches on the upper side of the leaf. And you can usually find lots of larvae where it exists. So in this case, which was again here in Manchester, I think there was 8 larvae in total on the underside of a single leaf. Very easy to rear through. If you were to find it this time of year, that's great, because it'll quickly finish feeding, pupate, and the adult emerges before the winter. So you get really nice fresh adults, again, different to the scruffy ones that turn up at the moth trap. A huge family, Tortricidae. We'll all be familiar with lots of these, things like the light brown apple moth and the green oak tortrix. But those 2 species and most of the family do not mine. There's very few that do really, but one that you will come across if you're looking for leaf miners is Gypsonoma dalebana. And this feeds on many different trees, commonly found on oak, hazel, sallow, but many others. And it forms this frass-filled tube, or frass-coated tube, perhaps on the underside of a leaf. And the larva, a pale greyish larva, feeds within that. And it feeds from September to November until it's about 3rd in star. I'm not really sure what happens to it after that. It must, because the leaves obviously drop to the ground. So presumably the larva drops with it, but then it must at some point climb back up the tree, because in spring it's the larva continues its development by feeding within spinnings of oak. Of all the plants that it's on, so oak, sallow, hazel, many others. But that's, if you're looking for leaf mines on trees at this time of year, you'll very often come across this species. Yeah, I thought that might be it. Okay. So in terms of getting started, it's useful to keep it simple. In fact, I'll tell you what, I'll come off the talk for now. Yeah, in terms of getting started, best keep it simple. Either look for a single moth species or look at a single plant species and make sure it's a plant you're familiar with. So something like hazel, something like beech, something like elm. They're good because there's not that many species that feed on it, and the ones that do are not that difficult to identify. If you go out into the field, take a photo of the mine. Better still, bring the leaf back home with you and try and identify it yourself. Have a look at it. Take a note of the features of it. What sort of mine is there? Is it vacated? So has the larva left? Is it tenanted? Is the larva still in there? Can you see an egg at the start of the mine? If so, is it on the top of the mine? Is it underneath the mine? Is it underneath the, sorry, is it on top of the leaf or underneath the leaf? And the mine itself, is the mine on top of the leaf or underneath the leaf? If there is a larva, what does the larva look like? And by making a note of these things, you can start to narrow down the options. There's a fantastic website, the British Leaf Miners website, which contains vast amounts of information. And there's some great keys on there to get you started. So if you can identify your plant species, so let's say hazel, it'll take you through all the options, linking it to photos of the various species. And probably in most cases, that will get you to your answer. But I'm certainly happy to help if anyone's got any ID queries about any leaf mines. There's an excellent British Leaf Miners Facebook group, which is a public group, so anyone can access it, anyone can join it. And if you put your photos up there, then someone's probably going to identify them. Not quite as, and there are people on there that don't just specialise in Lepidoptera leaf mines. Although I'm not sure if you got yours identified, Caroline. Maybe not, because yeah, I know you put some up recently that were non-Lepidopterous.
I did. The Facebook group were fantastic. So yeah,
oh, good. That's good. When I saw it, there was no identification, so that's good. I'm glad someone came back to it. But it's always much better if you have a go at it yourself, and if you turn out to be wildly wrong, it really doesn't matter. You'll have learned plenty in the process, and I think you're more likely to get a response to your query if you've shown that you've had a go yourself. So yeah, just another mention of
So there have been a couple of questions being asked. If we could just try and answer those. If that's
okay.
So we have. So Jonathan asks whether you can give any tips on rearing through. Okay,
most important thing I would say, well, it depends what you're rearing. I mean, if you're new to it, the Phalaenoptera mines, I would say, are easier to rear through. It's always a bit of a lottery, you know, there's absolutely no guarantees. But whatever your mine is, what you need to try and do is replicate the environment in which you would find itself in the wild best you can. So if you found a Phalaenoptera, they are pretty straightforward, and very often you'll get success just by keeping it in an airtight pot. Avoid mold, keep it dry. So make sure the leaf's dry before you put it in the pot, and just open it every day or two, dry out the pot until the leaf's really dry. Leave it in a shed or a cool, dark place over winter. And chances are the adult will emerge. I mean, quite a lot of them are parasitized. That can be another problem with leaf mines, which perhaps I should mention. A lot of them are quite heavily parasitized. So you may have done everything right, you still don't get a moth from it. little waspy type of creature that emerges instead. So yeah, with Phyllorictes, they're pretty straightforward. I just pop them up and stick them in the shed, and that'll usually do the job. If it's something like a stigmella mine or an ectodermia mine, one of the nepticulids, they're a bit trickier. Stigmellas, I think I would still prefer to keep them in a clear plastic pot in the shed over winter. And for most of those, that's as effective as anything else I've tried. Ectodermias are slightly harder to get through. And with those, I've had more success by preparing a pot, something like, one of those big yogurt pots, half fill that with clean soil and sand and some dried leaves, bits of straw, and make sure that there's no other insects in there. You don't want any predators or anything else to emerge that confuses the picture. You can half bury that in the garden, or just make a little hole, put it in up to halfway depth of the pot, put your leaves in that contain the larvae. Cover the whole lot with some stocking material, put an elastic band round, make sure it's out of, it's not massively exposed to the elements. It's good if you can let some rain into it, and you don't want it in full sun either. So perhaps something like underneath a hedge or underneath the edge of a shed, something like that. And try and forget about it. But make sure you remember when it comes around to March, April, and you can either leave it where it is, keep a close eye on it, or perhaps bring it indoors, put it into a shed. But check it every day, because when your moth emerges, they're not going to live that long, and it's a real shame if you've missed it, perhaps for you and the moth. So you'll see the moth appear up at the top of the pot on the stocking material. So take it inside, carefully remove the stocking material. I usually do it right up against a window. So if the moth flies straight out, it'll just fly on the window and sit on there. So quite easy then to pot up, photograph it, see what you've got. And as long as you're happy with the idea and everything, you can let it fly away. So yeah, hope that answers the question.
Very good, thank you, Ben. So Steve Graham asks whether tree orientation is of any importance in terms of leaf temperature, and whether sort of sunlight hours affect the larvae.
Right. Well, I would say it might be.
Okay.
I'm not sure. The only thing I would say in relation to that is that generally, if you've say got a wood, you're better off with the trees that are on the edge of the wood. Generally, do better. So you imagine that a bit of light is essential. The ones that deep inside the wood, you may not find quite as much, but it probably does vary by species. So it's maybe something that there's more to be learned. I don't know if Steve Palmer has any info on that.
Sorry, Ben, I missed out on that. Say that last bit.
That's okay. About orientation of the tree, does that have any effect? So I presume, does that mean whether it's facing north, south, east, west? Was that the point? I don't know whether that makes any difference to whether there's more leaf mines or not. I was just saying, if it's on the edge of a wood, it'll often be more productive than what's on the inside of the wood.
Yeah.
But, more than that, I couldn't really say.
No, my guess is that some larvae do seem to prefer sort of sunny or sheltered or that sort of situation.
Yeah.
You don't seem to find anything quite so on the exposed westerly side sometimes.
Yeah.
But there was a study into a Galeckiid moth which feeds on sea buckthorn, and that was found to choose very sheltered trees that were actually well inside the sort of main area of growth. So some larvae don't do that.
Yeah. It preferred the shelter to the lighter, more exposed areas. Yeah. I
think there is a little bit of a recorder bias in terms of accessibility. If you're walking along a woodland ride, you can only search areas that are available to you. So we don't fully know what's going on in the canopy in the woodland, do we?
That's true, certainly right. I mean, obviously we'll concentrate our searches in the lower leaves.
Yeah.
Who knows what's going on further up? Yeah.
But woodland rides and the edges of woodland are just great places.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's the Phyllorictes. I think there's 9 species that feed on oak, and we have most of those within the county. But there are a few that haven't been recorded, but I think in all cases, they are species that are said to feed in the upper tiers of the oak tree. So, again, not as accessible. So the only way you'd really find those is by picking the leaves off the ground with mines in and rearing through sea white birches. So
and similarly, there are species that you would only find on new growth. So it's worth just having a look at different levels, isn't it, if you can?
Yeah, absolutely.
Have we any other questions? Just to note that there are a few copies of Ben's book available from the Lancs Fauna Society. So if anybody's interested at the end. Caroline asks if there are any features that can give a clue that you are actually looking at a moth mine rather than any of the other insect groups.
Yeah, good point, good point. It's not always easy, especially when you're getting started. So many things can look like a mine. It may be some fungal damage, or the leaf has just been damaged itself, so definite things to look for. Obviously, if you've got a larva present, then that's pretty categorical. And if you've got frass present, then equally that is too. I mean, they're the main things to look for. With Polyphorus species, the way that the larva will feed within a leaf, it forms often a round blotch, but the larva has to puncture the leaf first of all. This is the one that feeds inside a case, and it will just shuffle the case along the leaf, make a little hole, and then pop its head in and eat round, usually in a fairly neatish circle shape. So if you can see the little hole where the larva has entered, even if it's no longer present, then you can be pretty sure that you're dealing with the feeding signs of that particular species. Sometimes it's not that sure, that's certain, and to be honest, at an early stage, I'd just discard those. If you're not sure, then leave it. Keep looking until you find one that you are sure of. If you can see frass, if you can see a larva, certainly if you can see, well, if you can see frass, then you know you're onto a winner. If the larva's present, then that's better still. But a lot of mines are perfectly identifiable even when they've been vacated. The jargon is that mines are either vacated or tenanted, i.e. have they got a larva in or not.
I think other than that, it's just a case of going out there, looking and becoming more familiar with the different groups. Just a quick point that wasn't really mentioned. If you are collecting any leaves to take home, I would suggest taking either a pot that's quite large or a bag to keep the leaves moist. They can desiccate quite quickly and become quite damaged if you don't do that. If you were just to put them in your pocket or your rucksack, it's best to try and preserve as much of the detail as possible. And also a hand lens or two. So really key for looking for the egg and some of the finer detail.
Yeah, absolutely.
The field equipment.
Can I suggest an additional thing?
Go on.
One thing I find really useful, I don't know whether you can see that,
Yes,
is to press the leaf between newspaper, let it dry out, usually takes a couple of weeks at most, put it in an old CD bag, label it up, and you've then got your leaf mine to look back at any time if you're not sure about the identification.
Just make sure the larva's left the leaf first, but yeah.
Yes.
But yes, that's great. Yeah, I do the same as well.
right, I think.
Could I ask one more question? Just again, I'm very new to recording leaf mines. What's the best way to submit your records? Is it the same as for other moths, or is there a different way to do it?
Yeah, it's exactly the same. So you just whichever way you record your moths currently, whether you do your own, whether you use the Lancs moth spreadsheet or whether you use MapMate, you can record it in exactly the same way. Make sure that the date you put on is the date you found the mine, rather than say the date an adult emerged. And within the comments section, you can put the details if you find, which you might need to so that the county recorder and future county recorders are happy with your find. So put as much detail as you can, you know, position of the egg, was the larva present, was the mine on the upper side or the lower side, and on the is it on the status section where you put adult or larva, you can put mine tenanted or mine vacated. And I think that's probably all. Is that okay, Steve, or is there anything else you would want?
No, that's absolutely fine. A photograph is always probably one of one. No, if you keep one of those as well, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and don't do what I do and not change the detail in terms of it being an adult or a larva, and then end up causing a bit of a headache for the county recorders when they begin questioning why I've recorded this as an adult.
In November.
Yeah.
Yeah, very easily done. I'm sure we've all.
Right. So if that's all, Ben, could you stop screen sharing if you're finished?
Oh, what was that, Justine? I missed that.
Sorry, could you just end the screen share and then I can?
Yeah, will do.
I don't know whether you need to.
Ended that. Okay. I hope I've ended it now.
There we go. So I'm just going to give a very short presentation on, sorry. Richard, I'm just going to mute you. Oh, you've done it, thank you. So I've got a very short presentation on a few mines that I found at Gate Barrows recently. I think it was back in September. Haven't really had much of a chance to get out and do anything else, and you know, as the sort of daylight diminishes, becomes even more difficult. But I found a decent amount of species. I think at the time I walked around for a couple of hours, maybe found around 20 species. Wasn't really looking for anything in particular, just casually walking along, and you know, you find bits and pieces. But I did go back for another visit quite late on in the day the other week, just to try and get a better picture of a couple of the species that I'd photographed, purely because when I put the presentation together, they came through so poorly. I thought, try and get some better ones. But as it always turns out, you can't find what you originally, the ones that you were looking for. And so I've had to omit a few species, but I've found a couple of other bits and pieces in their place, so not all is lost. So Gate Barrows, for those of you that are not familiar with it, it's sort of situated in the northern part of the Arnside and Silverdale area of outstanding natural beauty, and it's mostly limestone pavement, some calcareous grassland, marl grassland, there are a couple of lakes, sort of Haweswater, Little Haweswater. It's really nice, stunted trees, really species rich, well recorded. I think there are about 600 species recorded at Gate Barrows over the years. So I've just put a couple of maps on. The highlighted one is, I've just selected national nature reserves using magic maps. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that, and it just puts the boundaries of national nature reserves, triple SIs, things like that. So it's quite a large site, and it's managed by Natural England. And there's a car park, access is fairly good, get on in lots of different places. The area that I walked around was mainly, if anyone's familiar with it, around the shed, just did a little loop and back down again really. So the first species that I found was Eczemia arcuatella, and this has only recently been added to the list in Lancashire. this is a new sort of area for where this was found. So we originally found it a couple of years ago during a visit, and this one was found near the shed. So it's nice to add another little area. So the ectodermias are an ectoculid, and when they're quite young, they make these tiny little squiggly mines in wild strawberry. And this is an example of a species that can leave the mine and re-enter into a new leaf. So you find quite often with it that you get lots of little mines in a strawberry leaf, and then you find, like in this example over here on the left, where you've just got an individual large mine. I know the leaf is quite old, but you can just about make out the mine here. And there's no evidence of the younger mines. I don't think they feed on any other rosa. I think it's just the wild strawberry, but they're generally found between sort of August and October, and you can find them a little bit older, you know, later on in the year if the leaves are still present on the ground. The best place to look for them, if you were in the AONB, sort of on the edge of coppice. They like a little bit of shelter, so generally out in the open I wouldn't really find them. But things like this are definitely worth keeping your eye open for. I mean, when I found the first, I was just checking a moth trap and thought, I'll see what that species is, you know, being relatively new to looking for leaf mines, and it turned out to be a county first. So the next species is Ectodermia septembrella, and the larvae mine Hypericum species, or St. John's wort, and they make this sort of spaghetti, sort of like linear mine, and then it ends up becoming sort of one big blotch. And it's quite typical that they fill the leaf. I generally only really find them on the larger Hypericum species, but every now and again I've found smaller mines on the smaller leafed ones. And I think, you may want to correct me, that the larvae do they pupate in here and they sort of inflate the middle?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
They're quite a nice one to find, but very rarely come across them. And I think so there'll be multiple generations, probably perhaps 2 or 3.
Yeah, that's right. I find these common on the Hypericum shrubs that you can find in supermarkets and near sort of housing projects and things. Often planted around Manchester anyway. I don't know whether it's quite as popular up there in North Lancashire, but I mean, that's a really good source of mines of this species.
I feel that they prefer the larger leaved species
than
the smaller ones. Yeah. So next one, yeah, there are a lot of neticulids, purely because it's quite a species-rich genus, and I find them quite easy to identify. As you say, you can identify your plant species. You can generally name your moth. So this is Stigmella speciosa, and it feeds on sycamore.
Yeah.
And again, this sort of starts off as a narrow gallery, and it's quite sinuous, and it expands and becomes wider until it terminates and it leaves the leaf. But it's not a very common miner in my experience. You find the odd one, 2 here and there, but quite infrequently. The frass initially fills the mine, and then it sort of leads to a border at the end. And as long as you find, the release on the sycamore, you can find them well into sort of November, I would think. The egg is on the underside on this species. Yeah, that's a nice easy one to find. I found it in a a number of places. So this one was from Gate Barrows. I found them at Lancaster University, Middleton Nature Reserve, just wherever. Sycamore is really, it's quite a ubiquitous species. Next one of my favourites to find, so is Stigmella plagiculella. Looks like a little tadpole. So a lot of the Stigmellas make sort of gallery mines, but a few of them will make blotch mines. So the egg is laid on the underside of blackthorn, and they'll make this gallery initially, which quite abruptly leads to a blotch. And quite often you'll find that a number of them have used the same leaf. And I'd be surprised if I didn't see one of these in the AONB out on a walk. But I think it's quite a local species. I'm not sure how common it is away from the limestone. Certainly only ever found one or two elsewhere. That's quite a nice one to look out for. Don't know whether I've got the ID right of this one. It's not one I've found before. So it's Stigmella sorbi, and this is on Rowan. So again, we have a short gallery. It sort of looks like a blotch, but I think the mine is sort of quite contorted, and it appears to be quite a large blotch. I don't know whether anybody can agree on that mine, whether it is what I say it is.
It probably is.
Yeah.
The other could it possibly be Lancashire I don't know. Let's have a look. Let's see if I can find it.
I was very unsure.
Yeah. You may well be right, Justine. You may well be right.
The bit in the middle, Justine, looks as if the leaf has been damaged, not necessarily a blotch. So I wonder if it's one of the other Stigmellas, Nylandriella or Magdalene, which has started its mine but been forced away from the damaged bit of the leaf.
Right, okay, that's a bit. I'm quite used to seeing them sort of following the leaf edge.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll that record.
Yeah, I think in that case it might be Lancashire that's been, and then the leaf's been damaged and didn't get any further, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, you could be right. The thing to tell with Clerkella is to look for an egg. If there's no egg, then it will be Clerkella. Okay. If there are eggs present, then it will be a Stigmella.
It's very atypical of Clerkella. But you know, there is always going to be variation, and it's good to question these things.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Unsure of it.
Yeah, and sometimes that's how it is. You know, you'll find something, you know it's a leaf mine, but with the best will in the world, it's just hard to be certain. You might be right. You might be right, and maybe it's sorbi, but it's difficult.
What I would say is there were other mines on the same tree that looked very similar. So there was a lot.
Okay. If they were all similar, then that certainly increases the likelihood. I suppose the thing is, it's quite an early miner, Stigmella sorbi. It feeds in early July, June and early July. So you know, if you were to go back start next summer or next July, you'll probably find much fresher version where it's incontrovertible that it's Stigmella sorbi.
Absolutely. Thank you.
No problem.
So the next one is Stigmella catharticella. Again, not very common, and the egg is, you can sort of just where the mine starts. So the egg is laid on the midrib, and the mine is very faint at the beginning, and then it's followed this vein, and then you've got a really nice contorted mine. And these feed on rhamnus. I can't even remember the common name, buckthorn, alder buckthorn. And again, I only find one or two a year, but I've frequently found it at Gate Barrows. And generally, only you're lucky to find one on a particular tree.
Yeah, yeah.
They're really infrequent. It's quite a nice one. And so this is one that I found on the second visit to try and get some better pictures of others. Now, this will be probably the second record to your first one, Ben. So you recorded it at Gate Barrows. So this is Stigmella prunitorum on blackthorn. And I think you recorded the first for Lancashire back in 2017 or 18, was it?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
Yeah. So I've actually found the species before on Arnside Knot a couple of years ago. And I think previous to that, there was only one historic record, which wasn't confirmed. But as I was walking back, it was quite dark and late, and it just sort of stood out on, it was really quite shaded, a really underdeveloped blackthorn. And yeah, there we go.
Yeah, I've only found it on really tiny blackthorns with really tiny leaves. And they always seem to be vacated, annoyingly enough. But there's a couple of areas where it's really common when you can sort of find, 15, 20, 30 mines. But
well, when I found it on Arnside Knot, it was like that. So it was on the Red Hill side and really exposed northerly edge, but the mines were all on the southern side of the blackthorn, but there were lots of them.
Yeah.
Well, this is only the second time I found it, but it's a really nice, tight swirl, and then it moves off, and then obviously goes to pupate. So it does the opposite of a lot of the others, where it starts off as an initial and then goes tight. It sort of does the reverse. The thing is, a lot of these things that I'm finding are quite local or quite restricted, but you can never say never. Not all species are really common. We do have a lot of uncommon species around. So I move away from the Nectaculids and move on to Elachistidae. I think all of the Elacistas feed on grasses, rushes, etc. And I don't know whether I'm going to be corrected, but I think this is Elachista gangabella, and this is on false brome.
Yeah, that's quite right. Yes, it is.
So you can usually see a linear mine, and then it becomes widened, and the linear area is generally filled with grass, and then this fully fed larva will overwinter here until next year. And so this is the top side view, so this is the top of the larva, and then this is the ventral side, so you can see its little legs, see the gut, and that, again, that's quite common if you can recognize the grass species, which is is very common in the AOMB and becoming more so. It's quite an easy one to find, and you'll find that all the way through winter. I'm just glad the ID was right.
yeah. No, it is. And with these, it is. If you get the plant right, you'll almost certainly get the moth right.
But there are a number of other Elacistas that will use false brome.
Yeah. I've never found any of them, but yes, that's right.
No, neither have I. And this is actually the only Elachista I've ever found. So.
Oh right, okay. Well, congratulations.
Not mining anyway. And my last species is a poor picture. I do apologise. Adana microdactyla, or I think the common name, I know many don't like them, is Hempagra mini plume. It's quite a really nice, small, dainty plume moth, quite sort of yellowy in colour. I've recorded the adult a number of times at Gate Barrows, but it was Ben who first showed me the feeding signs of the larvae, and you look for this little hole that the larvae make. Well, initially I would look for the expanded area on the node and a little bit of distortion perhaps, and then you would generally find the hole. And I was doing a little bit of reading about it, and apparently the flowers will abort if there are larvae present. So that's another sign before you even go looking for these feeding signs, is to look at the flowers. And I think that applies in a single generation. And you'd find larvae from about September onwards. Yeah, so I think that's it. Yeah, I'd omitted quite a few mines because the picture quality was so poor. So I thought it was best not to confuse people.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Justine. We had a question while you were talking from Jonathan Wallace, which is a really good question. So caterpillars of some micro-moth and butterfly species will cannibalise larvae of the same species if they occur on the same leaf or plant. Is this something that happens with leaf miners? I think Steve gave an answer below, which is not heard of it happening, but sometimes if two mines clash, then one will survive over the other and one will not.
Yeah, I'm not aware. I've not really come across, one eating the other. And I have known in some cases something like stigmeloplagicella, which Justine showed on her excellent talk, the one on one of the ones on blackthorn, where sometimes two mines kind of coalesce to form one in the blotch. They both seem to survive happily enough. There's a few mines where you have multiple larvae, but I've never seen one eating the other. But I guess anything's possible.
I think it's reported in captivity, and I think that's where that comes from. I think when they're put into extreme conditions and they are restricted, then I think they do turn to cannibalism. Why not?
Maybe. If the leaf dries up and isn't giving them the nutrition they need, they've got to look elsewhere. And have any alternative at that stage, do they?
So let's have a little look through the questions.
I think that's all the questions answered for now. Can't see any more in the chat.
Yeah, Gate Barrows is a really good place to walk around if you we're interested in getting into leaf mining, because there's a lot of coppicing and it's quite well managed. You've got a lot of the common tree species like hazel and hawthorn and things like that, and they're all quite stunted.
Yeah, everything's pretty low down, isn't it?
Everything's really accessible, and it's a good place to begin.
Justin, I just ask, are your photographs taken with a mobile phone?
They were.
They're very good. What do you think?
They're the best of the bad.
Yeah, it's worth knowing that.
Yeah, just a
nice presentation, thank you.
Awesome. Yeah.
Same to Ben, lovely presentation.
Thank you, Brian. You're very welcome.
I hope everybody's got your book.
Oh, yeah. Actually, I looked through the questions before, and somebody did mention that, so perhaps I should have mentioned it a little bit more. So the salesman pitch coming up. If anybody's interested in reading more, they can find it in this book, Micro-moth Field Tips, by me. And it was published by the Lancashire and Cheshire Fauna Society a few years ago. And it contains details on the early stages of, I remember now, 200 or so micro-moths, many of which are leaf miners. And it certainly gives some clues into looking for the early stages, and particularly leaf mines. And lots of common species are featured in there. Volume 2 currently in preparation, but Volume 1 is still available from Lancashire and Cheshire Fauna Society, Natural History Bookshop, and all good booksellers, obviously. That's it.
Anybody is quite generally just interested in getting into the micros, then you do need this. So the Field Guide to the Small Moths of Great Britain and Ireland. So this is the second edition. So this was recently updated by John Langmaid, Steve Palmer, and Mark Young. And I think Ben, you authored a chapter.
I did the Ella Kiss Today chapter, and the photos on the front.
The original version is just as good. If you wanted to buy a second-hand copy, maybe it was a little bit cheaper. But you're better to have the most up-to-date information. There are no pictures, generally just very basic information on OV, larvae, pupa, and imago, and distribution maps. But it gives you everything you need.
It's absolutely fantastic book.
Yeah.
I mean, that, I originally got actually that's the third edition, Justine.
Oh, was it really?
Yeah, the second edition's the one I bought first, and I thought field. It was called, I think it was called Field Guide to the Small British Lepidoptera, and that sounds fantastic. There'll be all photos of all the micro-moths in there.
Yeah.
And when I got it, I was so disappointed. But within about 6 months, I thought, this is the best book ever. It's fantastic. There's just so much information in it. And I would slightly disagree with you, just because I think the new one is really worth getting, because it's much more detailed, I think, than the previous. There's a lot of new information.
I said the new one was better to get, but if you wanted to,
the other ones are still fantastic too. You're right. But if you can afford it, get the new one. It'll be worth every penny. And it's got some good info on the distribution as well. So well done to Steve and the team for that.
Other than that, I have nothing else to add. I don't know whether, Caroline, whether you want to go over your slides, or I'm very aware that we've gone over time.
Yeah, I think it's probably best left, because I think we've gone quite over, but it was just really to emphasise exactly what both yourself and Ben have said already. It takes you time to get your eye in and to spot what's a mine, what's a fungal lotch, what's just autumn. There's lots of experts and brilliant resources and people really willing to help. So it's always good to have a go at the ID first yourself. That's the best way to learn, I think, but lots of people willing to help. And you really don't need to go far from home. I had a walk out before work last week and found 9 species, half an hour from my house in the middle of Markham. So yeah, you don't need to go anywhere far, don't need to go anywhere fancy, just get out and enjoy it.
What I would suggest, and I know this hasn't been mentioned, is that if you are planning on submitting records, I do suggest that you look at the guidelines and the gradings for each of these species. What we don't want, while it's fantastic, is lots of records coming on of lots of species and nobody's sort of checked the entry requirements. So if you look on the Lancashire Moths website, there is lots of information on the criteria for recording leaf mines, and it's important that these are followed to the best of your ability. A lot of the time a photograph is all that's required. The majority of species you wouldn't even need that, and as you become more familiar you can move away from that, but a lot of species do need rearing through. There's lots of confusion, so it's worth familiarising yourself with those guidelines. Thanks, Caroline, for adding that. What I do have is, so Steve Palmer has put together a really nice guide for getting into leaf mining, and lots of information sheets on the majority of species that we've covered today. So what I'll do is I'll email those out to everybody, and if you would like our presentations, I'm more than happy to put those on as well. There's lots of information for you there with all the links to the resources that we've mentioned today.
Brilliant. Well, just I think on behalf of everyone, a big thank you to both Ben and Justine. It's been a fantastic session, and yeah, when the weather's not so bad, makes me want to get out and have a look. So yeah, thank you to you both again.
Next year.
And the other good thing about leaf mining is you can do it in any weather. Don't be put off by the rain.